All right, in this video, we're going to be getting into keyboard shortcuts for transforming this object. So go ahead and make a new file to reset the default scene. Again, it's File, New, or Command-N. Using the widgets, again, is helpful, but being able to use keyboard shortcuts is much more powerful. So the important thing to realize is that you have the X, Y, and Z axes, and you can use those keyboard shortcuts of X, Y, and Z in conjunction with the transform tools. So to change the position, I'm going to Command Z to undo that. To change the position, it's actually G, so it's not T, which would seem logical, but it's G. You can think of it as grab. So hit G for grabbing. And if I hit G, I can immediately move my mouse. I'm not clicking any buttons. I'm just hitting G. And then I can left click to put it down someplace. I'll Command Z to undo that. If you hit G to grab it and you didn't mean to and you want to put it away, you can hit Escape on your keyboard and it'll let go of it and put it back in the middle. So it's sort of like a quick undo. So if I hit G and Z in sequence, so GZ, then I'll move it just along the Z axis. If I hit GX, it'll move it along the X axis, and GY will move it along the Y axis. So again, these are really important keyboard shortcuts to memorize. I'm going to be using them all the time this semester. So if you just see me spontaneously moving it, you can pretty much be sure that I'm using G. If I'm spontaneously moving it along the y-axis, GY, that's what I'm hitting. GX and GZ. So again, the next couple of keyboard shortcuts I'm going to go through relatively quickly. Pause the video as you need to practice these. So if I want to move it along a plane, so let's say I just want to move it along this plane, I don't want to move it up and down, I can hit Shift GZ, and what it basically means is that the shift will say move it along all the planes except for Z. So if I hit Shift, or sorry, it's G, I hit G, so I'm not holding these down, I'm just tapping them on my keyboard. So I hit G and then Shift Z, and you can see that then I see both the X and the Y axes, and I can move this around. It sort of slides around on this plane. So let's do this again. So the order is G to grab it, and then Shift Z. Whoops, I didn't quite do that right. G, and then Shift Z. There you go. So you have to hold down the Shift and then hit Z. You can't do that in sequence, but you hit the G first so that it knows, okay, we're going to grab it. The other thing that's sort of useful is using numeric increments. So if I want to move this in very precise positions, I can use numbers to move it Blender units. So if I hit GX1, it'll nudge it 1 Blender unit in the X direction. If I hit GX5, it'll nudge it over 5. If I hit GX and then minus or -10, it'll jump back that far. So being able to use the numeric increments, again, is really handy if you're doing anything sort of mechanical. Okay, so that's moving things. The next is rotating. So if G is grab, then R is rotate. And again, if I hit R, I can just spontaneously rotate this. I'm going to go ahead and actually delete this cube. X delete. Shift S to put my cursor back to the center, Shift A to make a new cube. All right, and again with rotation, it's the same principle. So RZ will rotate around the Z-axis, RY around the Y-axis, RX around the X-axis. I'm going to undo those so that it goes back to the middle position. If you hit RR, it rotates like a trackball, so it actually rotates in 3 directions, which is kind of useful. And then also, if I want to type in increments, so if I hit RZ45, it'll move it 45 degrees in the Z-axis. All right, you guys are doing great. Again, pause the videos to practice these as you need to, and look at those lecture notes if you forget them or in the Lancel Val book. The next one is scale. Scale is S. So if I hit S, I just scale it freely. Again, same thing, make sure you don't scale it down and then it starts getting bigger again, then it's actually a negative object. So I hit Command Z to undo that. Scale X along the X-axis, scale Y along the Y-axis, and scale Z along the Z-axis. I'll undo those, Command Z or Control Z. Then same as with grab, I can scale it along 2 planes if I want to. So if I hit S and then Shift Z, it'll scale it along 2 planes of axis. Or I could do a different plane. It doesn't have to always be Z. So I could hit S for scale, Shift Y, and it'll scale along those 2 planes of axis. And finally, if I want to scale a certain number of increments, I can say scale Y 10, for example, and it scales at 10 Blender units. Now, the next thing that's helpful to think about has to do with views and how we view these objects. This is going back a little bit to what we did before. Right now, we're looking at this as a single view, but very often you'll see 3D modelers using what's called a quad view. So let's go ahead and look at that. If we go to the View menu, you can see there is, if I can find it, Toggle Quad View. So this is a keyboard shortcut that many students find helpful. For some reason, I've just gotten really used to toggling very quickly between different views. If you find that's helpful, do that. But most students end up using the Control-Alt-Q, which is the Toggle Quad View. And this is actually a much more professional way of working. So do as I say, not as I do. So if you hit, select this, Control-Alt-Q, it splits your screen into 4 different views. So there's the user perspective, which is basically the view that we just had, top orthographic, front orthographic, and right orthographic. Some individuals also find it's helpful to change this to the camera view. So these views you can't actually change. If I move my cursor over it, I can't change it. But if I hit 0, it goes and toggle 0. It goes back and forth between my user perspective and my camera view. So if I want to change how this looks in the camera view, I can move it in these other screens. So I could move this along the x-axis, the y-axis, or I can move this along the x-axis in these different views. You might also find that you want to rotate it in a certain way. So depending on the view that you're using, this is a very helpful way of aligning this very precisely. So if I want to try to line that up, I can do that again. To get out of that, it's Control-Alt-Q, which will toggle that and go back to your camera view or user perspective. So Control-Alt-Q will toggle between the quad view and just a single view. Many students find that very, very helpful. All right, the next thing that I'm going to show you has to do with splitting windows. This is something that'll happen. Maybe it's already happened to you by accident, so it's important to know how to undo that. Sometimes you might want to say, look at a 3D view and your camera view. So to do this, you can actually split this entire 3D viewport window to have 2 3D viewports of the same object. Up at this corner, you can see there's a series of diagonal lines. If I click and drag these over, you can see that now I have 2 windows. Now don't keep splitting it because it can get really confusing really quick. So I'm going to close out of these tabs. I'm hitting T to close my Tools tab. And you can see I can also then split it in a different direction. So I split it horizontally. If I want to split this window vertically, I can do the same thing. So I'm just clicking and dragging at that corner. Now the hard part is getting these back. You actually have to merge them back together in the same order that you undid them. If it ever gets too crazy, just toggle quad view and that'll get you set up. So if I click and drag this corner up, you can see that I get this dark arrow, and this will merge it back up into this window, and now it's one window again. So again, you have to move it back towards the window from which you split it. So I split it out this way initially. If I click and drag it back in this direction, it'll split it it'll merge it back this way. Now you can merge it the opposite direction, but when you're first starting off, you have to go in the direction that you originally split it. So let's practice that one more time. So I'm going to click and drag to split this. And let's go ahead and split these a couple times. And then let's reunify them. So again, they have to be reunified in the direction initially that they were split. And then you can split them, you can merge them whichever direction you want. All right, that's pretty good. The well, now we'll get into the next stuff in the next video. This is plenty